Alright, so I'm going to be demoing two things, and your requirements for throwing is you just have to create a set amount of pieces, and I'll give you that set amount once I figure out how long this project is going to span. So usually it's 2 to 3 thrown pieces on the wheel. You'll have enough time where if you mess up, you'll be able to make up for it. So I make sure that you guys have ample time, because you are going to fail on this, you're going to make mistakes. It's part of the process. So today's demo, I'm going to be showing you guys how to make bowls and cups, the two basic forms. These are what we're going to start off with. When you guys jump on the wheel, I'll be throwing with you step by step together for your first piece, and then after that, then you guys are all on your own. So odds are your first piece may be thrown with higher quality, because I'm here to help you every step of the way. After that, then all you have is your references in front of you, and then I'll be walking around to give you pointers, but I won't be here every step. Make sense? Alright, so for wheel throwing, things that you'll need. You need bats, which are plastic. These are located right over there in that hot mess of things. There's a stack of black ones. One per person. You're going to need a container of water, a small plastic container to put clay scraps, a needle, I'll show these on the camera, a wooden knife, and then I like using the rice paddle for shaping, but it's not necessary. So there's the cup, container water, and then I have these things called chamois, which I will give out when you guys are done. These are for finishing your piece. Alright, the way the wheel works. There's a pedal on the right side. You push the pedal down to accelerate the wheel. You push the pedal back to slow it down. There's a brick on your left side. So your left foot should be on the brick, your right foot should be on the pedal. So that means both knees are at even height. I'm throwing with this over because I don't want the recording of my crotch as I'm throwing. So this will be covering. If you want to bring your own towel, it will help keep your pants clean, because some people, they throw very messy. And you will get clay on you. So something to consider if you want. Okay? For anyone with long hair, make sure you tie your hair up when you throw, because you don't want your hair hitting the clay and or getting stuck underneath. If you have long fingernails, I highly recommend you cut them, because if you have fingernails, you're going to gouge your clay and it gets more difficult. Alright? To get it started, I'm going to teach all of you guys how to throw right-handed. Are there any left-handers in here? Okay, I'm left-handed myself, but I throw right-handed, and I find it easier because you do a lot of the work with your left hand. So you're actually a left. And if you ever take ceramics outside of here, everyone in America learns right-handed, so you'll be able to get help from other people. Okay? So the wheel needs to spin counterclockwise. So there's a switch here. For the wheels on my side, you flip it towards you, and then when you press the pedal down, it's going to spin counterclockwise. Okay? So you always want it spinning counterclockwise, not clockwise. When you get your clay, everyone's going to start off with about 2 pounds, or roughly the size of your fist. So if you have fists around my hand, my size, like my hand, about 2 pounds. If you have bigger hands, so maybe like Kula'i, you might need to do 2.5, Kana'i, sorry, 2.5, maybe 3 pounds. Okay? I already have my clay over here. You guys are going to need to knead it or get all the air bubbles out. So I'll have 2-pound discs ready to go for you guys. You need to bring it to the table, knead it up, get all the air bubbles out. So the first piece I'm going to be making is this bowl. Alright, so I have my clay. I'm going to tap it into a bowl to get it ready. On your paper, what is step number 1? Cone clay to bat. Alright, so what that is, you basically get this piece of clay, you're getting it stuck to the bat, and you're pushing down on the outside of the clay to make it into a cone shape. Okay? So oftentimes in videos you may have seen people just throw the clay down. I don't really do that per se, because if you throw and you miss, it's so much harder to get it back to center. So this is the way I recommend, at least when you first start. So you take your clay, and first thing you want to do is find the center. You don't really need to take notes on this if you don't want to. When you find the center, you take a little piece of clay or water on your finger, rub your clay to get slip. Find the center of your board. That little dot where I marked, that's where my clay is going to go down. So as I then get this stuck, I'm going to be coning this to the wheel by pushing down. So I put my hands on the outer edge of the clay. I'm pushing down at 3 and 9 o'clock. Then I rotate my hand, rotate the clay, rotate the wheel about 90 degrees, and I repeat. So when you're pushing on the outer edge of the clay to get this side perfectly flush with the wheel head. So you rotate, and you push. And another few things to know about wheel throwing, we talk about hand positions in terms of a clock. So if this is midnight, this is 6 o'clock, usually your hands are going to fall between 3 and 9. All right? They may shift between like 2 and 8, or was this 4 and 11, but they're mostly going to fall here. The other thing about throwing is you always want your elbows locked on your legs. This is the hardest part because it's so awkward. Oftentimes when students learn how to throw, they're folding their hands. When you do that, your hands are not anchored to anything, and the odds of you being nice and stable are very low. Okay, so step number 1, cone the clay to the wheel or the bat. Step number 2, what do we have? Seal the edge of the outside. Joanne, can you pass me one of those sponges in the dish rack? Thank you. All right, so you're gonna also need a sponge, which I forgot to mention. All right, so any sponge in the dish rack. So we're gonna seal this outside edge to the plastic. So to do that, you take your sponge, add a little bit of water, and what I do is when I squeeze this sponge, I'm squeezing it between my pointer fingers and my thumb so that the tip of the sponge is outside of my fingers, and I'm applying downwards pressure at 3 o'clock where the clay meets the wheel or the plastic. Okay, so that's right here. So I do it at 3 o'clock. I anchor my elbow to my leg, brace my left hand against my right, and I apply downwards pressure. So I seal and blend this clay to the bat. So what this does is it prevents water from getting underneath the clay and lifting it up. So this makes sure that your clay stays nice and secure. So sealing your edge. Okay? What's step number 3? Push it down. So we want to make sure this thing is stuck really good. Oftentimes when students throw, this thing pops off and then you have to start all over again. So we want to make sure it's stuck well. So to get it pushed down to the wheel, we add a little bit of water. When you work with the clay, you always want your clay shiny. You always want water on your hands. And then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to apply downward pressure to get this compact and flat. And then we want to make it back into a cone shape. Okay? So my right hand is going to fall down at 3 o'clock. Is going to be a C shape. My left hand is going to be a flat palm. My thumbs are going to interlock inside of each other like that to create a 90-degree angle. Okay? And then I'm going to lean my body weight forward and transfer my body weight from my hands into the clay. Okay? So lean forward, and I'm having the wheel spin about medium speed. Okay? As I did that and I applied pressure, how did the shape of my clay change? More flat, right? So before we move on to the next step, we got to make sure that this actually goes back into a cone shape. So what we got to do is we do that same step. The only difference now is we're moving our left hand outwards so that this becomes a cone. So you apply downwards pressure, then we slowly bring our left hand out, and then apply pressure on the outside of the clay to get it back to a cone shape. This is really key because if you have a flat top and you start doing the next step, you're actually going to create a crater in the tip of your piece. So I'll show you what I mean in a second. All right, so that is pushing it down. Okay, what's the next step? Cone up. So coning up and coning down, so step 4 and 5? Those 2 steps are the most important part about centering, getting this piece ready to dig your well and create your object. Coning up and coning down is also the most difficult part about throwing, and that's the part that's often discouraging for students because it's not the easiest to understand, so you just have to keep doing it with repetition. So coning up. What I'm doing is I'm trying to get this to be less wobbly. So I'm going to get actually more wobbly so you kind of see what happens when I do this technique. So you can see the twist forming. This is not centered. If I put my fingers on the clay, you can see my fingers move up and down, side to side, right? So we got to get this clay to be narrower and taller by coning up, trying to get all this wobbliness to the very top of the piece where I can get it more centered. So the way this technique works, I take my left hand, make a C, it falls and drops right here, up between 3 and 6. Right? My right hand is going to be on the opposite side of the middle of my palm, so like that. Right? So then your left hand is going to push the clay towards the center. Your right hand is going to pull the clay towards the center. So they're both moving towards each other. And they're both applying pressure at the base. That's going to cause the clay to rise. Okay? As the clay rises, my hands are then going to move up and towards each other until I get to the tip. So it looks something like this. right? Left hand drop, right hand on the opposite side. Apply pressure at the base of the clay. And as I do that, what do you see happening to the clay? Is it wider or narrower now? Narrow, right? So as it gets narrow, then I'm slowly going to bring my hands up with the piece. And then as I get close to the tip, I'm then going to slowly move my left hand over the top and cup it so that I remove any of the wobbles up there. So all those wobbles that we saw presently, I moved it to the top and then I compressed it down to get it nice and even. Okay, so that's coning up. So coning up, if you have a flat top, we'll do something like this. So let's say we're ready to cone up, we flattened it down. When you cone up, watch what happens to the center here. Okay, what just occurred here? We created a crater, and that's something we don't want when we cone up because we are going to have to push the clay back down. When we push the clay back down, that crater may cause air pocket to occur by trapping air. So whenever you cone up, you always got to make sure that you have a tip here. Thank you. A tip here when you cone up. That's very key. Okay, so coning up, one more time. Apply pressure at the base, work towards the center, both hands move towards the center, and then up the piece. Nice gradual speed, left hand cones over the top, and then slowly releases. Alright? So that's coning up. Next step is coning down. Compressing it back down to that mound shape so that we then can dig our well and move on to the next steps. So the first thing I do before I cone down, I want to get rid of this clay skirt here. Right? I want this to be a nice vertical wall. So this is a very important term to remember, clay skirts. We don't like clay skirts. We want to get rid of them as soon as we see them. You take your sponge, just like how we blended the clay to the bat in step number 2, we're going to push down, but instead of just pushing down, we're then going to move it inwards towards the center of our piece to remove that clay skirt so we have more of a vertical wall. Alright? So you see the difference of the vertical wall versus where it was before? We always want a vertical wall because that's where our fingers can get really close to the piece. If it was a skirt like this, our hands are going to be in that curve and odds are it's going to be pushing up higher than the very bottom. Alright, coning down. This is the part that's a little difficult. Coning up is usually a little easier. So coning down, we're applying pressure to get this more compact. Now the one thing to remember when you cone down, you're not pushing straight down. You're pushing the clay away from you at a 45-degree angle. Okay, so that's very key. Okay? The reason why you don't want to push it straight down is because as you push straight down, the clay expands in all directions. While it expands in all directions, it's too hard for your other hand to compress it and get it back to center. When you push it only in one direction, as soon as it comes back around and hits this hand, it's easier for it to get centered. Okay? So one thing to remember. So to overemphasize this technique, I'm going to get this to a very tall cone so you can really see how this works. Now coning down. It is possible to cone down just with one hand if you want. And so the way I do it, I get my left hand, put my thumb between my pointer finger and middle finger to create this little nook here. Right? This little nook will go perfectly over the tip and then my fingers will then wrap around the clay like that. Right? The way this technique works is you apply downwards pressure right here. So I'm shifting my weight over so that it's better for the camera, but this will be right in front of you. And then you just lean forward and push down. And as you can see, the clay is actually bending. But as I'm pushing diagonally down, it's compressing and becoming less tall. As I get closer down to the height I want it to, I'm going to slowly release the pressure because the clay is getting too dry. Add a little more water, and then repeat. Push down at a 45-degree angle, and then keep compressing until this becomes a nice centered mount. Okay, so that is coning down. Now, I don't expect you to ever cone down with one hand yet. That was just to show you that the clay actually bends forward as you compress. So coning down with two hands looks something like this. So I'm going to cone up one more time. And when you cone up, you don't need to go too tall. You just basically want to get the wobbles from the bottom up to the top. And when you cone down, what do I do with this clay skirt again? Remove it, yeah, get that out of here. We don't want that. Okay. And then this cup here is used to put your little crumbs and scraps so that it's easier to clean up later. Okay, so it's coned down. Your right hand, there's two ways to do it. I'll show you both ways. Your right hand will brace up against the base of the clay so that your pinky's in that little groove you just created. Your left hand, you're doing that same technique where you're creating that little nook for it to go over the top. And then the left hand drives the clay down diagonally this way. The right hand is pushing the clay inward at the base this way. So it looks something like this. And I'm leaning my body weight forward to let my body weight help me do the work. The moment you feel the clay start, or your hands start pushing straight down, release the pressure. Odds are you're gonna need to add a little water. And then re-engage by using this part of your hand to push the clay diagonally forward. Okay. As you do that, your thumb is naturally gonna release from your hand like that and spread across. All right, so this is pretty centered, but let's say it's slightly off. We were able to compress it down, but it's still wobbly. We still need to get it centered. So another way to get it centered is, I call this the karate chop. Your left hand will then fall, and this is bracing this time, and your right hand is gonna be applying downwards pressure diagonally across. So this part of your hand will be placed right here, diagonally splitting the wheel, like that. Your right hand will be on this side of that diagonal, right? This hand compresses the clay down. Your left hand, you're using the heel of your left hand here to push the clay inward. So just by pushing the clay inward, I can actually just center this. So if you just watch this real quick, left hand falls here, and then as I'm pushing in, I'm not just using my hand, I'm moving my whole body forward. So the balls of my feet, so these are my feet, my balls of my feet, the tips are slowly shifting towards the front, so I'm getting off my heels. So that my whole hip moves forward into the clay. So by doing that, I can get this centered. So by moving forward, my whole hip moves forward, I'm pushing those wobbles away from me, and then as it rotates, it's matching this form that I'm making, and it can center. Okay, so that's another way to center. How's it? Yeah. Okay, just place it underneath the board for me. Thank you. All right, so the way this technique works, left hand braces, right hand using the side of this, and then you're pushing both hands forward to the clay, and you're slowly speeding the wheel up as you do this. Once you feel the clay melt and become centered, you release the pressure. So that's another way to center if it's already compact and it's pretty close to being not wobbly. Okay? So next step, after coning up and coning down, what is the next step? Okay, so repeat is just doing that over and over again until you get it centered. Okay, after repeat, what's the next step? Dig my well. So I'm going to be applying downwards pressure with my thumbs in the center to create a hollow inside. So the way this works, you're using your thumbs, one thumb on top of the other. You're applying downwards pressure in the center, and you're going to keep digging until you get about 1/2 inch thickness for your base. Okay? So the way this works, hands drop left and right between 3 and 9, thumbs on each other, and you're applying downwards pressure, light pressure first to get a pilot hold. And then you're going to add a little bit of water in that hole. Make sure your thumbs are still lubricated as well. And you're going to apply more downwards pressure to get this wider and deeper. Right? As you apply downwards pressure, your thumbs should not be moving side to side. If they do, that means your well is not centered and you have to recenter your clay. One thing as you dig, if your thumbs are stacked on each other like this, when you dig, odds are you're getting it deep and wide. So your well will look more like a deep V. We want our well to look more like a wide U, like that. So to do that, try to have your thumbs separated, so using the sides of your thumbs to dig, and then the sides here are applying pressure on the walls here. So now I don't expect you to do this right away, but this is a technique that will help you later on. So I like digging my well like that because it gets wider and deeper at the same time. Now if I go back and I just dig like I learned initially and how you guys will probably learn, you get a well done, but it's just very narrow. So the moment you shift your hands, you're using the sides of your thumbs to apply pressure, it actually opens it up and it gets it deep at the same time. So you're saving some steps as you move forward, making your throwing more efficient. All right, you guys remember how much clay you should have at the bottom? 1/2 inch, right? So to check for depth, you're using your needle now. You're taking your needle, you're stabbing it directly into the center. Then you're taking your hand, making a pointer finger out, thumb touches your middle finger, the needle will go inside of your hand like this. and then your pointer finger will touch the bottom of your well where your clay meets the metal. Then you grip your needle and you pull it out. The distance from the tip of your needle to the tip of your finger will be the thickness of your clay. So we want it about 1/2 inch, which is roughly about where I have it here. Okay? So after we do that, what is the next step? I just dug my well. Open your well. So we're now going to open this up to make it look more like a donut. Okay, so to open your well, the way I like doing it is I'm using my pointer finger and my thumbs. Thumbs go inside, pointer fingers go outside, and my fingers are on the midnight part of the clay. My thumbs are then moving towards the pointer fingers like that. My pointer fingers are staying stationary, my thumbs are doing all the work. As I move in towards midnight, your goal is to get this wall vertical and parallel with this wall. So it looks something like this. Okay, so make sure your clay is lubricated and wet. Move your thumbs to the pointer fingers. You do not want to go deeper at this point, you're just getting it wider. Okay, my clay is getting a little sticky, so I need to add a little more water. And then once my inside wall is parallel with my outside wall, then I'm ready to move on to the next step. Okay, so if I soak up the water, you can see my inside. Now it's different heights. This is higher, this is lower, this is higher. So the first thing I want to do before I move on to my next step is compress and level this out. So I want a nice flat floor, a nice flat bottom. Okay, so I'm using my middle finger, I'm compressing the clay at the bottom to make it nice and flat. Then I'm using the sponge to push it down and even it to clean it up. Alright, after you open your well, what is the next step? Set your inside corner. So right now my well kind of looks like this. It's kind of hard to see from that side, but it's a curve. There's no 90-degree angle. There's no corner here. I want my well to look like this, like a sharp 90-degree angle or an L. So that's right here. So to set your inside corner, you're using your left finger, doesn't matter which one, I like using my pointer finger, and you're applying downwards pressure where that 90-degree angle should be. So where your wall meets the floor. So as I push down, now I have that nice vertical wall from top to bottom and a nice floor from middle to edge. Okay, so that's setting your inside corner. The reason why you want to set that corner is because as you pull this clay up, we're going to need to apply pressure at the very bottom of the inside and the very bottom of the outside to squeeze the clay and then move it upwards. Ooh, that is not good. All right. Next step, after setting the inside corner, pull the walls. So this is the hardest part about throwing once you center. So pulling your walls up. So basically the way this works, my left hand is going to be on the inside right here where I set my corner. My right hand is going to be on the outside right here where there is no skirt. Or if there is a skirt, remove it now before you move on to the next step. And the way the pulling works, the left hand will push the clay out, right hand will push the clay in, then both hands will then move up to pull the clay vertically. Things to remember as you pull up. You're pushing in and down, out, so your hands are going to be offset, right? As you apply pressure, you're applying the most pressure at the bottom. As you pull up, you're releasing the pressure, and your goal is to get a nice even clay wall from bottom to top. Okay, so the way it works, take your left hand, push the clay out. So as I did that, my vertical wall here now has a little undercut here. So that's where I pushed out. Then you're going to push in at the base here to create another undercut. So now I have two undercuts, inside and outside. As I compress the clay between those undercuts, the clay is then going to snake between my fingers. And as I pull up, I'm going to be able to use those undercuts to pull the clay up vertically. Okay? So when you do it, you don't need to do it like me where I'm doing it step by step. You can push out and push in and then pull up all at once. Or after sequentially, or not sequentially, but right after the other. So push out, push in, apply pressure. I like having my left thumb anchored against my right hand. And then as I pull up, what am I doing with my pressure again? Release it. So as you get about halfway up, start releasing the pressure, but you're continuing to rise all the way through. When you get to the very top, leave your fingers there for a few seconds, let the clay catch up, and then release. Someone come in? Oh, okay. Alright, so that is my first pull. So I'm going to repeat that. So coach me through it. What do I do with my left hand? Push out at the very bottom on the inside. What do I do with my right hand? Push in. And when I do pulls, I like using the sponge in my right hand because the clay stays lubricated. or the sponge stays lubricated. Versus if I use my fingers, the clay dries out much faster. All right, so as I do that, I pinch the sponge so I have the tip beyond the tips of my fingers. And then, once again, I push out. As I push out, you can see the bump forming on the outside. Then I push in underneath the bump. And then I start pulling up. And then once again, when you start pulling up, you're releasing the pressure as you rise. And this is about 20%, 10%, at the very top 0%, let the clay catch up and slowly release. Right. After a few pulls, your rim may not be level or flat. So we gotta do something called compressing or compressions. So compressions, what it does is it flattens this out and removes any excess clay. So the way compressions work, your left finger goes inside at the rim, right finger goes outside on the rim at 6 o'clock, then the side of your pointer finger is applying downwards pressure as if it were a parking gate closing. So as I do that, what just happened to my rim? Flattened out. And then what happened over here between my fingers? I collected all the clay that's not attached. So every few pulls, you want to do compressions. Alright, so I'm going to keep doing this until I get my clay wall about the thickness of this rice paddle here. And then I'm going to start shaping it into my bowl. Okay, so once again, push out, push in, and then pull up. Okay, since I'm making a bowl, I want my rim a little thicker because as I expand this outwards, it'll get thinner as it stretches. Do that one more time, push out, push in, and then pull up. Alright, let's see, what step are we on now? Shape. Now we're going to be shaping this to our final outcome. So I want it rounded and expanded. So I'm going to apply inside pressure outwards, just like how I did my pulls, but I'm not applying inwards pressure from this hand. Inside hand does all the work, I'm pushing out, and this is slowly going to start shaping to the bowl that I want. So I'm applying pressure on the inside of this finger outwards to expand it. But before I do that, I like throwing texture on my pieces because it makes it look a little more unique. So this is not required, but this is something that I like to do to my own personal work. Actually, I'm going to pull the wall one more time, one more pull. I like throwing some texture on my pieces. So what I do, you can try this later if you want. Use my left hand as a wall, and then on my right hand is then going to apply pressure into the clay, and I'm just going to undulate it up and down to create some organic texture lines. So your first few pieces, I don't recommend doing this until you get comfortable with the techniques. So now it looks a little more exciting. When I throw clay, or throw glaze, I can just use a solid color and it's going to look a little more exciting than just a smooth surface. So shaping. Left hand goes on the inside. I'm applying outwards pressure where I want it to expand. So I'm going to start expanding, not the very bottom, but I'm going to start about halfway up. And I'm going to start creating the belly of my pot. In this case, a bowl. So if you ever throw lines or texture on the outside, you cannot use your left hand, you cannot use your outside hand to apply pressure or you're going to remove all that texture. So shaping, technically, is all done with the left hand. Alright, so I'm applying outwards pressure where I want the clay to expand. Once the wheel does one full revolution, then I slowly start moving it up and transferring that shape I want throughout the entire piece. Okay. My right hand is bracing against my left so that even though my elbow is floating, it's resting against this hand so I have more stability. Alright, now I love shaping with a rice paddle because I can do it far more aggressive. So I'm bracing it in my left hand, wrapping my right hand around it, and I'm applying outwards pressure. And so this part of the rice paddle is scraping against the inside. So it mimics the shape of the rice paddle. And then just like how I use my hand, I slowly bring the rice paddle up to expand that shape all the way through. So the first few times you guys shape, I'll probably have you guys use the rice paddle because I find it a little easier to learn using this, and then you can use your hands later. Okay, the inside shape is kind of hard to see, but I want a nice continuous curve. So I'm then going to compress the inside with the sponge or with the rice paddle, compress the curve here to make a nice seamless inside shape. And then I'm going to keep widening this out until I find my final shape that I want. Okay, now I'm starting to look at the outside because I'm realizing my curve at the bottom is a little too wide. So I'm expanding the top to then mimic or to make that outside shape a little more seamless. Alright, so my bowl is basically done at this point. Now I need to do the last step, which is finish. So the things you want to do to finish, we got to wire it off this wheel. You also got to cut the top here to make it level if it's not. So if I put my finger on here, I can feel it rise and fall. So there's two ways to cut the top. One is with the needle, which is a little more complex, but basically you take the needle, holding your right hand, you're pushing the clay, or you're pushing the needle into the clay wall, and then transferring that pressure into your inside finger, which is my left finger. When the needle touches my tip of my finger, I pull up, and then I can cut it all the way across to make it level. The easier way to do it is you use a wire, wrap it between your fingers to make it taut, and then what you're doing is then dropping this to the height that you want, and then pulling up, and then it cuts. So you got to make sure that you have not too much slack. Spin the wheel, drop it to the height, and then lift up. So either way, they both work. Okay. The only downside is if you use the wire and you cut and then your hand's moving up and down, you're not going to get a flat top. It's really important to get a flat top because next step is we flip it upside down and we're removing all the clay from the bottom. Alright, so that's to level the top. Then my next step is rounding this out. So if you look at this rim here, is it smooth or rough? So we want to smooth that out just like we do with all our pieces. So I use this chamois. I apply light pressure on the rim. And then I'm compressing the inside and the outside clay wall to round that out and make it a little more finished so that it won't cut anybody's lip when they use this. Okay. After I do that, you can see that the shape has changed dramatically. It's now nice and rounded. And now I'm ready to get this cut off the wheel. So I take my wooden knife, I'm applying pressure with my pointer finger here to cut a little bit of clay away from the base. Removing that excess skirt again because we don't like these skirts at all for clay. And then we're taking our wire tool, placing it between our pinky and ring finger, so the washer's on the outside. Thumbs will go on the wire on the far side of our clay, and then we just cut towards us. Alright, at this stage, you then would drape a plastic bag over it, let it dry out to leather hard, so dry enough where you can remove the clay from the bottom, but still wet enough where you can still somewhat change the shape. Yes. Okay, give it up. Alright, so that is basically throwing a bowl. Sadly, I lost track of time, or that took a little longer than anticipated, so I'm going to do a cup real quick if you just want to stop, just watch me run through it. You don't need to stay here. If you want to start packing up your things, you can. Darian, can you grab me another plastic bat so I can just do this demo really quickly? So if you want to stay, I'll be able to finish this before the bell rings. So this time I'm not going to talk through my steps, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Can you open this bag for me? Oh, just pull it from the bottom. Okay, so once you get proficient at this, you can make pieces, you can crank them out in really, really record time. Okay, so some of the steps you guys have seen, I don't really do because I combine them into each other so that I am being a little more efficient as I throw. When I throw, I don't usually throw this fast. I go a little slower, but just to show you how fast you can actually do it. this is just going to be a cup, so this is going to be a cylinder. So that's basically it. Just need to clean up the inside a little. So like once I get in the groove and I have to make production, I try my best to throw each piece under 5 minutes so that I can make the most out of my time. Because if I take like an hour to make each piece, then the amount of money I have to charge will be a lot higher. Okay, so that's basically how fast you can throw once you get really good. Okay? Say it again. Oh yes, so now you have to clean. Is that what your question is? Yeah, so cleaning is really crappy because you have to clean all this clay off every time you throw. So the first thing I recommend is just wiping away all the excess clay from your hands. You can do this at the sink over the buckets. But when I clean, I like using another container of water. And then all this excess water, I pour into one of those buckets. I'll let you know which bucket to pour it into. Then you grab another container with a clean sponge, and then what you're doing is just wiping this down, get it clean, and then bring it into the sink, rinsing it. I'll do more of a demo on that later. I have 5 minutes, I can show that real quick. So after you cut this off, you pop these off. Jacob, can you pass me that short plastic container? So usually we throw all our excess throw water into a container like this, and or the large scrap bin. Depending on if I need moisture in there, I'll let you know where to put this. All the clay scraps like this, you'll be tossing it into the clay scraps, so all this stuff here. And then tools and stuff, you just toss in your throw water. I only have a set amount of wires, so you guys will be sharing that. And then when you wash your wheel, I'll recommend cleaning your hands first, but because I'm here, I'll just rinse them in this. But doing this in the sink is far better because then you want clean water when you come back to the wheel. Turn the wheel off as you do this because you don't want this to spin. And then you're just taking your sponge and your water and you're swiping this clean. Rinsing your sponge in between swipes. And then you're getting as much of the clay off as you can over your wheel section so you're not hogging the sinks because the sinks will get backed up in cleaning up time. And then once you get most of the clay off, then you bring it to the sink and rinse it and sponge it off over the buckets. Alright? Same thing with tools. The tools you can easily wipe and wash in front of you. And what I'm going to try to do is allow you guys to hold on to your set of tools as you throw. So whatever you wash and throw with is what you're just going to hold on through the entire throwing section. Alright? That's basically it. After you're done, you turn it off, unplug it, wrap it around wrap the cord around here, and you take your chair and place it upside down. If there's any splatters on the ground, you wipe that up. And then the last thing I didn't show you is you do need to wipe the wheel head as well. And your goal is to get all the clay off of this, and don't be like me and leave a mess for the next students, because your next class, grade 4, is going to be throwing as well. So stuff like this won't be acceptable. I've been using this over break, so that's why they're dirty. So I'm going to be wiping them down for you guys so that you get a clean one, like all the ones that are covered in chocolate.